Okay, so some of the students brought up some great questions today, and I said I would make a video to answer that. And it was basically, why is y the same thing as f of x? I mean, how did we get to that point is the question. How do we get to the point from a y, and now we're using this f of x thing? So I'm going to do my best to answer that question. I said I'd put it in video form so that, because it was a good question, other people could hear the answer as well. So if you're that student, you're the reason this video is here. Let's talk about what we first learned. We first learned math stuff like this. 2 plus 3 equals 5. And we would have seen something like that maybe in the first grade. But somewhere around the third grade, they start doing this trick to us. They do 2 plus, we put a box there, equals 5. Now, indeed, the answer is still 3. But we just kind of guessed. We didn't use algebra, really. And maybe some of you did. If you're in Singapore, you did. But then, we started getting to middle school, and they did this trick to us. Now, it blows our minds. They say 2 plus, instead of putting a box, they put a letter, equals 5. Now, it's really the same thing as a box, right? But for some reason, this blew our minds, and we thought, oh no, there's a letter there. What to do? Okay. But the answer is still 3. We can solve this by subtracting from both sides. Then, so this is probably middle schoolish age. And then they do get a little tricky on us, right? They say something like x plus y equals 5. We went from one letter, one variable, to 2. And this is now maybe middle school, high school algebra. You start hitting this. And there's lots of answers. In fact, you can't just answer it one way. A lot of times we make charts. If x is a 0, y would be 5. If x is a 1, y would be 4. If x is a 2, y would be 3. Notice that the 2 and 3 is still one of the answers. And that's about where most of us are now comfortable. Every time we advance in a step, it blew our mind. Well, now we get to this thing that says f of x plus x equals 5. And all that f of x is another way to keep track of this. You see, what do you put in the first time instead of an x? You would substitute a 0, right? So you put a 0 in its place. If f of x is 0, then x would equal 5. But it keeps track of it. Notice that this also keeps track of it. It's really not that we're learning too much new throughout the years. It just looks different. It's a different notation. And so going back to this, the beginning, y is the same thing of f of x or f at x, however you want to call it. You can see that this really is the same thing as this. It's the same thing. They're just different ways of writing it. X plus y equals 5. You make a chart. Or f of x plus x equals 5, where you can actually see the numbers each time you do it, so you know what number you used. If you wanted to use a 1, you would use a 1. Right? All right. Well, anyway, I hope that helps you with the history, or progression, I should say, of math.